Hello and welcome to today's Partner Infopedia web conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Operations Tech Talk. Today's topic, Item and Warehouse Migration Process to use Advanced Warehouse Management. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Senior Program Manager, Per. Per, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and with me in the same room, I have two developers, Leonard and Vidas, in support of answering in case there should be any questions and chip in on the last part of today's presentation. So let's look at the agenda. So what we have planned for this 1 hour presentation is to provide a high-level architecture overview of the two warehouse management modules. The AX 2012 Warehouse Management 2 compared with the Microsoft Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition Warehouse Management module. And well, in order for understanding this maybe a little better, well, we do not support the WMS2 from the AX 2012 as part of the new implementation. So the next topic about when you may upgrade data from coming from that environment to the new environment, there is some considerations that I would like to present you for during this presentation. The same goes for how to enable existing implementation with a warehouse setup. What is the migration flow for doing that? I'll run through a quick demo showing how it is possible to enable a existing warehouse to support the new warehouse management module. And the same goes for if you have existing items with a storage dimension group associated running with a pallet dimension, what is actually the migration flow of enabling this item to become and use the new warehouse management module. I'll run a demo of showing how to migrate a existing product with open transactions within our demo data to use a new storage dimension group. And finally, the more technical part of how the whole migration is implemented for the change of storage dimension group. One of my engineers will drive through that and support you in case you have some extensibility. It could be an ISV solution with your own tables, etc. We'll come back to that at the end. So with that kind of a quick introduction of the agenda, let's go into the first part of today's session. About the difference between the two warehouse management module in a, let's call it, high-level architecture overview. On the small screenshot shown on this slide, you can see the bottom part, there's a small indication whether you are using warehouse management processes as part of your warehouse setup or not. And that's actually one of the things that you cannot enable a existing warehouse without using the process that I will describe here. And the reason really being that it's different data, different entities that is behind the two implementation. So if we take a look at the warehouse layout in AX 2012, if you're running with warehouse management 2, while you associate your warehouse with locations. And the locations are kind of being, say, the key part for capturing where the physical inventory is stored within your warehouse. It's an inventory dimension that you associate with that, and you'll need to run all your items with a location dimension as an active storage dimension. But besides for the warehouse layout on the AX 2012 side, you associate then the store zone and store areas for your locations. You have the capturing of capacity of the location loads saved in specific entities in the AX 2012 version. And you have some location types as a fixed enum value. And that those things around having fixed enum values, both driven business process decision in the X2012 solution, is very different in the Dynamics 365 process, which is on the right side of the slideshow. Here you see location types as well, but the location types are not really typically not driving the business decisions of how the warehouse processes are handled. That's more a flexible query process used in order to figure out whether it is a bulk area, it's a picking location. You query based on an ID or a description in order to take that decision. We do also have the same concept as in 2012 with store zone and store areas. It's called zone groups and zones, but the concept is more or less the same. It's getting associated with the location itself. We do actually leverage the same entity for the location, but the surrounding information for the new warehouse module is quite different. One of the bigger and differentiators is the location profiles on the new Dynamics 365. Location profiles is used for several purposes. It can be used for several purposes. One being taking care of volumetric calculations for storage capacity, so kind of similar as the location loads in the X2012. It may be that you also want to drive business decisions with the location profiles for whether you're allowed to store mixed items, stock keeping units on the same location, mixed batch numbers, and we have a new concept of inventory status values as well. And definitely the most important and thing that you need to consider as part of a migration, whether the locations are license plate tracked or not. In case you are migrating from a WMS2 implementation with pallet dimension active from AX2012 to the new warehouse module, because we don't support pallet as part of the new module, well, you'll need to use license plate, and it will need to be license plate tracked for those locations where you have physically on hand as part of the migration. I will, of course, come back to the more technical things around how that is handled later in this presentation. Another area also to consider for measuring or figuring out whether what your storage capacity within the locations are is a concept of location stocking limits. It's a more simple way of, and you could compare that with the WMS2 process of I have a capability of storing 1 or 2 pallet on a location. You can use stocking limits with unit conversions for the exact same setup. You can define that you have the capacity of storing 2 units of let's call it a pallet unit for a group of locations or a single location as part of the stocking limits. So that very high level idea about the difference between the AX2012 Warehouse Management 2 and the new Warehouse Management module in Dynamics 365. When it comes to products and the inventory on hand, and obviously as well then all the inventory transactions related to the different products, well, first and foremost, we need to associate a storage dimension group to a release product. And if you're running with the pallet dimension as an active dimension, when migrating, and you want the same conceptual behavior, you would need to associate a new storage dimension group where we have the license plate enabled. And in order to get the license plate, well, you'll also get the inventory status, which is a new inventory dimension, when you use warehouse management processes on your storage dimension group. And when that's done, well, we also need to define a reservation hierarchy for our release product. And that's because we have a complete new reservation method as part of the new warehouse module, we are capable of reserving in different levels. So the reservation hierarchy could, for instance, be starting with site, a warehouse, inventory status, and then we have the location and then license plate as an example. What is possible is with this new module is to set up that when you reserve, for instance, from a sales order line, we only reserve down to the, including the inventory status. We do not reserve on the location level and below. In this reservation hierarchy, that is something that will be maintained by the warehouse management processes. So it will be taken care of when we release to the warehouse. We will create something called warehouse work, and that's actually where we'll figure out where within the warehouse it would make the most sense to, for instance, pick inventory from, and therefore we also would reserve on a lower level with warehouse work. It makes it a lot more flexible because you can move around inventory within your warehouse without needing to swap and change reservation constantly, which you would need to do in the warehouse management tool implementation. So a very important part of a migration process is to consider, especially if you're running with batch number or serial number tracking, how would you actually like your reservation hierarchy to be defined? Pallets is, as mentioned, not supported. So when we talk about the defaulting of quantities related to pallets, something you defined on the item itself, well, we have a new concept for both. We have a unit sequence group, which is a mandatory setup for your release product, but you can associate that with a unit conversion where you can define the default quantities for different unit conversions. So it could be, again, a pallet at each. So you have, for instance, a default of 100 eaches on a pallet, as an example. And you can define the physical dimensions for all these different unit conversions. So obviously that also needs to be considered when, in case you are migrating a system implementation to leverage the new warehouse module. The warehouse item, well, this was the place to define the picking locations and to define one picking location per item per warehouse. In the new warehouse management module, the fixed locations is the same concept as the picking locations, but you got as many fixed locations you would like within the same warehouse, and you can sequence that in a very flexible manner by leveraging that drives from where we're going to either replenish or pick from of these fixed locations. And the whole concept of work templates is really the decision about how the warehouse workers would need to go and process the individual things, like it could be replenishment or it could be accounting work as example for that. And when we talk about counting, well, the counting groups associated with the warehouse system in 2012. You can still associate and have warehouse item defined on your products, but there's a lot more flexibility as part of the new warehouse module where you can define cycle count plans and you can schedule those with a very flexible query functionality. You can define policies regards to thresholds. It could be, as an example, when you pick the last item on a location, it will trigger off a counting event immediately, and which will be processed on a mobile app, which is also supported by this module. So that just for consideration, there's a lot more capabilities first and foremost, but there's also a lot more flexibility as part of the new warehouse module. The last part about on hand, well, as I probably will keep mentioning a lot of times during this presentation, pallets is not supported. You'll need to use license plates or basically just go all the way back. We call that kind of a downgrade scenario where you only use location for those processes, which is also, of course, an option. For processing, if we take the inbound for 2012 on the left side here, you probably have levels if you're running that, the item arrival journal. Here's the control whether you use pallets transport for put away or not. You have defined put away rules for whether it should be put into your bulk area, and the searching of free location within your warehouse. That kind of decision was taken based on your store area and the sequence of your store zones within this, the areas within your store zones. So it could be a searching, start with your A and then go to B area, etc., to fill up and have the most effective way of putting into bulk areas. For the arrival journal posting process, whether I should create this pallet input transport or not. For the new module, warehouse module, we will obviously use the mobile app when doing the receiving. We'll use the mobile app device processing to process the actual put away work. And the decisions about how that work should look like is defined by work templates. Where to put away inventory is defined by the location directives. And the mobile device menu items is the one deciding how the operator should experience this process. Whether it's a purchase order process when you have done your registration in the inbound dock area, it will look up and figure out, need to create some put away work. How does this work needs to be look like? It's a two-step process where you put it to staging and then someone else takes it from there and put it further on into the final location. Or is it direct put away? Is it the same warehouse operator that both are processing the actual purchase order registration and also processing the put away? Or do we have several warehouse workers as part of this? All of these decisions are driven based on the mobile device processing. So again, for inbound process, obviously when making this kind of migration from your existing implementation, it's important to investigate the capabilities which is possible in the new module and make sure whether it really is a one-to-one migration, or you can actually maybe even leverage the new and more advanced functionalities as part of the new module. The same will be for the outbound process. For the WMS2 process, well, we created shipments based on shipment templates. We looked up how the outbound rules were defined to figure out whether we, for instance, should use shipment staging processes or not. And of course, also figured out whether it would make sense in some processes to go and pick full pallets from the bulk area, whether we should trigger off replenishment work, whether we should pick via our picking routes. So those processes were, of course, in some cases flexible, but not compared to the new warehouse management module, where what happens here is that when you've done the release process, you may or may not automatically create your waves, which is a new concept. We have loads and shipments as well. So load, obviously, I mean, there's a whole transportation management module that you can leverage as well. But without that, it's kind of a combining thing that is hooked between the order process. So, for instance, a sales order or a transfer order, and then the warehouse work that will be created. So we have the wave concept that can be automatically released. You can release based on thresholds. You have different process methods a part of your wave templates. We have a complex consolidation process where we can calculate how inventory can be put into boxes, and the boxes can be put into, for instance, Euro pallets, and used as well for transportation calculations. It will figure out how is the outbound work actually going to be created via our setup on the work templates. We'll use the location directives again to decide from where are we going to pick and where are we going to put. At the end, we would like to put at the final bay door somewhere, and that will then trigger off that we do a pick update on our source document lines, our transactions for those. In case you want to do replenishment as part of the outbound process, we have concept of replenishment templates. You can associate those replenishment work as part of your wave processing. We can run both wave and load demand replenishment processes, which will then freeze the actual picking work until inventory has been, for instance, taken from the bulk area and brought forward to your fast picking area. And at the exact moment that the physical inventory is available at the fast picking, we'll unfreeze the actual picking work, and then we can continue the outbound process as part of the warehouse. For the more operational processes within the warehouse, counting processes, which in the WMS2 module, leveraging the item, the counting journal, you could trigger off on hand or item based on a query here. In the new warehouse module, we have this capability of scheduling and create cycle count plans that will create warehouse work, and the actual mobile app processing will make it possible to go and make sure that you capture the right recordings on each of the locations. We have what we call pipe location counting process. So you basically guide you if you want to count one specific stock keeping unit or product on a location. It will guide you to go and only record the counting of those specific release product or variants that you have associated with your cycle count work. And again, via the mobile device processing. Now, you have the capability of being a supervisor counter. We do post the actual difference as part of the counting journals, but they may be a complete review process if you're not a supervisor enabled as a worker. So there's a review process. So after having done the cycle counting, there's a cockpit for making sure that you accept or reject the individual counting that has been done by several warehouse workers during the cycle counting work creation. The mean max replenishment, well, besides, as mentioned, for the outbound, the load and wave replenishment, we have obviously as well the mean max replenishment is using the same area of replenishment templates. It will create movement work or replenishment work to bring inventory from a certain area of the warehouse to, for instance, your fixed picking locations. And that will obviously as well be processed via the mobile app. And then at the bottom part, the difference of pallet movements, and you may want to, in the WMS2, to use transfer journal to move inventory from one bin location to another, or between two pallets, etc. We have the mobile device menu items where you can define both movements within the warehouse, one warehouse, and also a warehouse transfer capability where you can basically, it will actually run transfer journals. So you transfer, but you use the mobile device to process those movements. And inventory adjustments, the same approach. You can use the mobile device for in and out bound adjustments in your inventory. So that's a very high level of architecture difference between the, let's call it legacy warehouse management module, WMS2 running, and then the new warehouse module in Dynamics 365. So that kind of ends the first part of the presentation. The next topic I would like to cover is regarding an upgrade process from your X2012 to the Dynamics 365. You see a small screen dump here for a item block for inventory updates. And the reason showing this one is really that, just again, to stress that palette is not supported. So in case you are upgrading with a item associated with a storage dimension group with an active palette dimension, we will put this item into this entity for block items, and you cannot create any kind of inventory transaction updates for this item before you have done a decision about how to migrate it. And besides that, there's some additional validation run. We do not want open output orders as in a consolidated state. We do not want to have open pallet transport existing and migrating those or upgrading those data to the new Dynamics 365. So the upgrade will basically not allow that. It will fail, and you'll need to go to your source environment and either cancel out these open transactions for WMS2 processing or complete them before you run the final upgrade. When having a upgraded data, or even as well without having an upgraded data, but maybe a complete new implementation, but you have not enabled any of your existing houses to become possible to use this new warehouse management process. Well, we do have a new form, a new page where you can go in and enable your warehouse setup for this new layout I explained in the start. The form enable warehouse setup is rather simple in the sense of the UI itself. You need to inform about which warehouse that you would like to enable, and all the locations currently associated with this warehouse would need basically one mandatory field to be updated, which is this location profile. So that's basically the only thing you need to do in the UI itself. Then obviously, in case you have run some upgrade and you have existing data with on hand, with open transactions in some state, you are physically on hand using a pallet dimension, there'll be validation that all the locations where you may have physically on hand with pallet ID, all those locations would need to be associated with a location profile, which is license plate track enabled. Otherwise, this will not allow you to migrate. So you either need to change that setting or go to your source environment and change that. And then you can kick off the migration process, which will basically take all your locations and associate this new location profile. And it will also do some more magic, which is shown here as a architecture view for those that are technically interested in this. What you see here is the representation of the two new tables that we use as part of the migration process, where we have the warehouse and we have the locations, and then the surrounding validation classes, etc., that will run the actual migration. So with this, let's actually try and go to the environment, and let's open up this new enable warehouse setup form, and let's go and select a existing warehouse within this demo data, which we now would like to enable to use warehouse management process. You can see right now this warehouse is not running with this small checkbox. We can quickly just go, so you maybe are familiar with what I mean by this is that as part of the warehouse entity itself, we have this use warehouse management process checkbox, and I cannot select this one. I cannot activate this one directly from the form itself. I can only do that if I create a new warehouse, or what I do now, take an existing warehouse and use this form to enable my warehouse for this new way of defining my warehouse. I have a lot of locations for this demo data. I have picking location types and bulk location types, etc. Now, I would need to create upfront a location profile. In the demo data, we have several, but for this, to make it simple, I'll just choose one here just to show. So in this case, my picking locations will be associated with a location profile ID. And this location profile ID, well, it's not using license plate tracking. So in case I did have inventory with a pallet for this one, it will actually fail the migration. It will not allow me to migrate. I will need to either change the setup or change the data. As you can see, there's a long list of locations. So it would take me a long time to manually key in all of these ones in this UI. I can choose to go and use our data connector as part of the Office interface. So I can open up all the locations that I would like to migrate, to change the setup for. What I basically need is to associate a location profile for all of these locations, right? I can choose this Office direct link here, or I can choose to use our data management process for this. So the difference is really that I can process it via Excel here, or I can use data management where I could, for instance, create here let's call it a warehouse location log, do it like that. And I can choose one of the different formats I would like to import here. For the simple thing, I'll just choose Excel as well in this one. And then I need to select what entity I would like to use to import against, right? So I'll import against this enable warehouse location for this new warehouse management process. And then I can select and upload this Excel file and then import this Excel file, and we'll update the entity with whatever I have defined as part of my Excel file. Let's actually go and use the Excel that I opened up here. I have published one of these ones, so what I'll do is that I will quickly go and select all of my location within this warehouse. So in this case, I'll just use the same location profile. Now obviously, you probably don't want to do this as part of the real migration, but it doesn't really make sense for me to start setting in that I want a different location profile for bulk location rather than using on my picking location. So I'll just do that. And then let's go and take a look at the enable warehouse setup form again. And you can see now that the data has been published back into the form, and we are ready to run a validation for this migration. Everything is fine. So let's do process and kick off a batch job, which will start running this technical diagram just that this showed you before. As soon as my batch server is picking up this batch task, it will start kick off, and it's done now. All the magic of figuring out to change my run the validation and then change the locations to now use location profiles. We can go and take a look on the location, the warehouse. We can see that it uses warehouse management process now. We can go and take a look at the locations associated with this warehouse, and we can see that all the same IDs is kept, but obviously it may or may not make sense to insert all the other entities like a zone ID, etc. And again, you can use the data management process for this to quickly update and set up in accordance to how you want your zones to be populated. The warehouse enablement process I just showed you only contains the basic must-have mandatory settings, which was the location profile. Yeah, so with that, let's close this one. We don't need this. Let's go back to the deck, and let's continue with the next topic, which is about the products itself, the on hand, and the inventory associated with that. Because, as mentioned, in order to get the release product enabled, well, we need to change the storage dimension group for the item. And if you have on hand open, you have maybe even reservations, it will need to be a new way of updating that. So either you have already processed your upgrade, or you can basically go in without and just, if you have an existing environment where you have not pallet, obviously, because that would not be possible, but you may have items which has the side warehouse and location, and you want to migrate that and change that storage dimension group. That's actually what I'm going to demo today. So after the upgrade, if you have pallet, it will be in a item. The items will be blocked if that's the case. And when we kick off the actual migration, we actually also will block that item because we'll make sure put some example here. Well, you need to have a new inventory status value on the dimensions. That needs to be defined before you can migrate. But we also verify the thing around whether you have physically on hand with a pallet dimension on a location where it's not supposed to be. Technically, validation needed is that if you want to warehouse management enable it, your items with the license plate and image status value, well, we do not want processing. We do not want you to have catch weight processing. You would need to define a reservation hierarchy, which is valid in the sense that you don't, for instance, have a reservation hierarchy having a batch number as part of your reservation hierarchy, where the tracking dimension of the product is not batch number enabled, as an example. We also require that you specify this mandatory unit sequence group as part of the migration. And when everything as part of this validation is a success, we are ready to process the actual migration. In case you have pallets, we will take those values and populate that directly into license plates. So pallet ID becomes license plate ID. Obviously, if you don't have pallet, it doesn't matter. We'll just skip that part of the migration process. Then it will be evaluated. Well, we need to change the existing inventory dimensions. We have, as an example, an inventory dimension that are having a pallet ID without an inventory status, because that was not part of the WMS2 without warehouse management. So we need to create a new inventory dimension value which hold those values, because that's actually what we need to change. We need to change the existing one to having new values. And we need to figure out which tables are actually going to be affected, which inventory dimensions are we going to update. So there's a whole list of tables containing invendim records, invendim information. Some of them are needing to be upgraded, other ones we will not do anything about. But that is also said, we figure that out, we run validation and figure out which tables we need to update. And then we kick off the actual migration task or the upgrade. We go in a parallel process and update all of the inventory dimensions on all the tables that are getting needing to have an update. And we'll obviously run validation during this process. And when everything is completed for the upgrade, we'll clean up and we'll, after that, change the storage dimension group for the item. We'll associate the reservation hierarchy and the unit sequence group for that item number. And then we'll kick off a recalculation of your on-hand, thereby getting the reservation updated for this new way of processing reservation. May remember there was this level, the hierarchy level, so we need to associate the reservation in new tables for that. And finally, then remove the blocking of the item. It's done, and after that you will be able to process inventory transactions again. So let's actually go and take a look at the application here. We'll go to change storage dimension group for items. This new page where you can insert a item. So I have an item here, and what I would like to do is I do already have created a storage dimension group which is called where, which has the warehouse process management enabled. I'll choose a reservation hierarchy called default, which is a reservation hierarchy that just takes site warehouse location. And then I will associate a unit sequence group, and the item I'm using as an a unit of measure. For the inventory is each, so I'll associate that. I could choose something that needs to be the minimum unit of measure conversion here. I'll just go and show you that currently this item are running with site warehouse location. Now, it could have been after a migration, then it may have also had the pallet dimension active, and then it would have been part of this item block for inventory updates. In case that I run an upgrade and it was associated with a pallet dimension, it would have been put into this list during the upgrade. Now, obviously, it's not. It's only for location, so it's a lot simpler. You don't need to take the pallet dimension and put that into a license page, but never mind, that would be the only difference. I will process now this change. Validation has passed. It will again start the create a batch job, and my batch server needs to pick this job, and it will spin off a lot of tasks, which will show some of the things later during the PowerPoint slide. But imagine now that it needs to go and run the things that I showed before. It needs to go and verify the settings of my current implementation with the on-hand. It needs to go and search all the tables for all the different invent as soon as the batch job kicks in, and figure out which of the tables would need to get an invent dim updated. So the batch server now picked it up, and you see, I'll just refresh here, that it spins up a lot of different tasks that keeps turning on. We can go back just so we align on this one. One of the first tasks that it did when the batch job took place was to stop and say, well, you cannot process this item now. As long as we are changing transaction and inventory dimensions, etc., and all the source documents associated with this product, you're not allowed to do any kind of transactions for this item. So, having this process continuing, we can go and take more looks at the batch job for it. See here how far it's now going. Seems like we now are in a final state. So the batch job is now ended, and therefore when we refresh this one, well, it's gone. I can go here and say I want to now show the items that have been updated, and you can see that it has been released from this blocked state. So now I'm ready to process this item. And if we go and take a look at the item for it has been changed, that the storage dimension group has been changed to this where, which is warehouse process management enabled. It has this one. It uses now site, warehouse, location, inventory status, and also license state, with allowing blank on the receive and issue. We can go quickly just take a look at the on hand. You see that it has still remaining physical inventory reserved, and the transactions behind this product is in different states. It's not purchased and sold. It's in received and deducted, etc., with physical reservation, etc., etc. So all of these processes that is needed for open transactions is still maintained. The only thing that may, in some cases, need to be considered is if you are having, let's say, reservations on a source document, and you reserve on locations or maybe specific batch numbers, and how you then want to process that in the new warehouse management module. Because as mentioned, it will not now, if I process this item on the warehouse we just migrated 22, it will not reserve on all dimension labels. It will only reserve down to the location, without the location, but above location. So it does not expect the location to be part of the transactions. So either you just remove that, or you process it manually via some other peaking processing. So that kind of ends the flow for showing, both how we change the setup for a warehouse. We have taken a existing warehouse as part of the demo data. In this example, 22, we have associated a location profile for each of the locations and run the change process. So now that warehouse is warehouse management process enabled. We have seen that we have enabled one of the demo data products with open transactions, which now also are running with use warehouse management processes as part of the storage dimension group. And so with that, we'll go down to very technical things around the extensibility parts, specifically around the item conversion. So you should see this as if you are having your own customization, or it could be an ISV solution on top of your implementation, how to get that one migrated as well to use the new warehouse management module. And because it's a very technical thing, I have asked my colleague Lynnerup to explain some of the technical things part of the implementation.
Thank you, Per. So the typical scenario that we see for ISV or partners extending our solution is that they have added a table which have reference to InventDim. Potentially they have added a InventDim ID field to one of our existing tables. Doesn't really matter, the scenario is the same. So what we see here on the screenshot is that I have my own table where I've added two InventDim ID fields. One is representing a reference to all the inventory dimensions, and one is only referencing the product dimensions. If you were to start the migration without doing anything, you would get an error like the one I show below. This is basically us telling you that we do not have the right information in the system to know how to migrate these tables. So what we need to know is whether or not the data in this table actually needs to be updated. So if you have data in the table where you don't need any conversion to happen, the answer is, of course, no, nothing needs to happen. If you have data in the table where something needs to happen, the answer is yes, something needs to happen. The way you tell us the answer to those questions is by implementing an event handler. So I'm going to show you a simple example of that here. This is all that's needed to tell us what to do in both cases. You just have to write an event handler that handles our event. We pass in the information about what table and what field it is that we have discovered, and then you need to tell us, yes, I need to create a certain task to convert this. That's what you see here in the first if. That's an example where you actually want the conversion to happen for this field. The lower part, the else if, is where you don't want any conversion to happen. So here you basically set the result to false. That's all that needs to happen if your table is what we would call for a standard table, a table where data is stored per company and where, when you have an inventory ID, you have an item ID reference. If you have tables that are different, we also have examples on how to handle that. A good examples if this invent batch journal source update task processor. There you can see how you will have to write your own logic to do the conversion. But there's plenty of examples in the existing code where we had to do this that you can follow. This is just some code showing you how you can actually find the tables that don't have any handlers. It can be beneficial for you to run this before you run through the entire migration, so you know what you're missing. We put in the architecture diagrams in the end here. I'm not going to go through them in details, but it can be helpful if you want to know how the code is actually structured. First diagram here is just covering the task initiation and the creation. Then we move into the task processing, thing that's actually telling us how we need to do the conversion. And finally, the model for the item migration, all the tables that include the item ID information and where we store what hierarchy, what unit of measure seeking group needs to be converted to. And finally, the tables that are involved in the conversion. All of this is placed in two new models, so it's really not intrusive to the existing application code.
Yes, so with that, so these two is just to inform you that the roadmap side is where you can see both what is planned to be delivered in the future version, as well what has already been delivered in an existing implementation, and the ideas portal in case that you have some ideas that you would like to get a part of the product. Then please do file all of those on the ideas portal. So with that, we do have at least a couple of minutes left in case there should be some questions that would make sense to bring up as part of.
Yes, there's a good question here from Eldar Gajic. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name completely correct. The question is, how will we train partners on this tool and process? Will this recording be placed on DLP?
That's a very good question, and I hope that my colleague in the other end will be able to answer that. I know for a fact that there should be a specific Yammer group where this will be recorded, or at least the PowerPoint, and I do assume that this recording will be published on that as well, or on the other side. If we can, we don't right now in this room can answer that, but we definitely follow up on that and figure out how this will be brought forward. When that's said, right after this release of this product, we will do our best to do a blog post of more detailed information about this capability. Besides, there's the documentation of the actual product itself, where it also will be explained during the release of the product. Do we have one more question we could take before we end? Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, while we wait for any lingering questions to roll in, I would like to go ahead and bring your attention to a link that I posted in the conversation pane. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference, and that we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference or have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And I do see one more follow-up question for you, Per and Lynnerup. Are there any reference materials available?
Yeah, so we will, as soon as the product or the version of this application is released, we will publish a blog post. So there's the SCM blog post for that, and it will also be part of the actual documentation for the product. So that's the two places where you'll be able to find references for the implementation of the capabilities. It's part of the documentation for the product itself.
All right, great. Thank you, Per. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to conclude today's Infopedia web conference. Attendees can access the web conference recording using the same link that they used today to attend today's live broadcast. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, Per and Lynnerup, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.